Shielding her eyes from the glaring flashlight, Hyona noticed the guy eagerly inviting her to join him and a few others who had a fire pot in the lobby of Building 5. He asked if she wanted to come and warm herself up, which made Hyona think about the men. One of her many followers, likely with bad intentions, tried to persuade her to join him, but she immediately declined, saying she could warm up in her own apartment and thanked him for the offer. Suddenly, the men grabbed her arm and urged her to wait, offering something more tempting. He claimed to have plenty of food and invited her to stay at his place for a few days, promising to take care of her. As he said this, he moved even closer to her. The men whispered to Hyona, urging her to consider his offer, saying she could live comfortably if she went with him, adding that he had always liked her type. This made Hyona feel creeped out and irritated. To her, he was just talking nonsense. With effort, she pulled her arm free and shouted for him to leave, demanding to know who he thought she was and that she didn't care about his worthless food. The man was momentarily shocked but quickly recovered, grabbing her hand again in anger and telling her to stop pretending. The men accused Hyona of shamelessly hoarding supplies and pretending to be a member of the property management committee, threatening to expose her. Hyona, having nothing to say in response, demanded that he let go of her hand, as he was hurting her. At that moment, other nearby homeowners overheard the man's accusations and started speaking badly about Hyona. Realizing this, Hyona became displeased, and in her anger, she struck the man. Hyona, furious, smacked the man on the cheek with her fist, shouting loudly for him to release her hand. The man's eyes widened with rage as he glared at her with murderous intent. He raised his flashlight, seemingly intending to strike Hyona's face with it, but before he could act, a resounding slap landed across his face. The slap was so powerful that his eyes rolled, and he was sent flying several feet into a wall. The person who delivered the slap shouted at the man, telling him he should be ashamed of bullying a defenseless woman. The commotion quickly caught the attention of the nearby homeowners, who began to question what had just happened and whether it was really a person they saw flying through the air. Seeing the men trembling on the floor, some speculated that a fight had broken out, while others suggested calling Glassesman to sort out the situation. Nurse Jean, who had delivered the powerful slap, approached Hyona and asked if she was okay. Concerned if she was hurt or feeling unwell. Impressed and a bit nervous about Nurse Jean's strength, Hyona raised her hand and nervously replied that she was fine. Hyona thanked Nurse Jean with a warm smile. Nurse Jean then offered her business card, suggesting that if Hyona ever felt uncomfortable or had any issues, she could come by for help. However, Hyona politely declined, covering her face with her scarf and turning to leave, much to the surprise of her helper. Unexpectedly, the men who had been presumed out of the picture suddenly grabbed the scarf around Nurse Jean's neck and forcefully pinned her to the floor. With a menacing tone, he warned her to mind her own business. The men, blinded by uncontrollable rage, shouted, "Mind your own freaking business, or I'll kill you," as he raised his fist, ready to strike Nurse Jean. But before he could bring his fist down, another hand reached out, grabbing him by his heavy jacket. With immense force, the man was slammed onto the cold, hard floor. For the second time within a few minutes, he was left trembling all over. The person who intervened this time was none other than Lizzie. With a cigarette in his mouth, Lizzie stared at the men with hollow eyes, exuding a menacing aura as he made his presence known. Lizzie, with a cigarette still in his mouth, coldly mentioned that the most disgusting men he had ever encountered were those who laid their hands on a woman, and he asked the guy if he wanted to die. As the men tried to get back up, Glassesman, Mr. Zhang, arrived on the scene, demanding that everyone make way. "What's going on?" he asked, and the homeowners around were relieved by his presence. Before anyone else could respond, the men quickly spoke up, saying, "Mr. Zhang, this woman is hoarding supplies. I saw her hanging out with the rich second-generation types who were driving up prices." Mr. Zhang turned to Hyona, prepared to hear her side of the story, as the tension in the crowd grew. Hyona immediately fired back, denying the accusation. I didn't do any such thing. How dare you, a jerk who beats a woman, try to play the victim? She retorted. In a flash, Lizzie, angered by the situation, raised his fist behind the guy, ready to strike. But before Lizzie could take action, he was surprised to see Glassesman, Mr. Zhang, grab the guy by his jacket. With a serious expression, Mr. Zhang questioned him, "What do you think of the Property Management Committee? Protecting vulnerable groups and ensuring that everyone has enough food to eat is our duty and responsibility." The guy, now visibly nervous, started to stammer, realizing the gravity of the situation and the trouble he had brought upon himself. The man quickly apologized, admitting he was wrong and promising it wouldn't happen again. It became clear to everyone that the guy was part of the committee. Glassesman, Mr. Zhang, released him and told him to just leave next time. He then approached Lizzie and the head nurse, apologizing for the scare. "Sorry for scaring you too," he said. Then, turning to them, he added, "Anyway, are you two really not going to consider what I said before?" Without hesitation, Lizzie turned and walked away from the scene, saying he had no interest in participating in gang robbery. "I would rather starve to death than join Glass's crew," he said, making his stance clear as he left. The sudden departure of Lizzie, along with his firm refusal to join the committee, startled both Mr. Zhang and Nurse Jean. Nurse Jean, with her usual warm smile, turned to Mr. Zhang and apologized, saying, "I'm sorry, Mr. Zhang, but I still can't accept this method. However," she added, "if you have patients who need my medical assistance, I'm still willing to help." Hearing this, Mr. Zhang thanked Nurse Jean for her offer. He then sighed heavily as he watched Lizzie and Nurse Jean walk away. Just then, Hyona called out to him from behind. Puzzled, Mr. Zhang turned to see what she had to say. Hyona, adopting a seductive demeanor, approached Mr. Zhang and grabbed his arm, closing the distance between them. "Actually, I have always admired you," she said, trying to charm him. "Unfortunately, I never had the chance before, but now everything is different, and we have plenty of time." To her surprise, Mr. Zhang gently but firmly rejected her advances. This was a shock for Hyona, as it was the first time in her life that a man questioned her usefulness and didn't immediately succumb to her allure. Mr. Zhang politely put some distance between them and asked her with a calm, measured tone, what she truly wanted and if there was anything else she needed from him. With a smile, Mr. Zhang asked, "Did you misunderstand?" He continued, "I asked them to join me because they are useful people. One can fight, and the other can cure diseases. What can you do? I'm sorry, but you're not worthy of my attention right now." With that, he turned to leave, leaving Hyona absolutely dumbfounded. However, his words about her not being worthy sparked a thought in Hyona's mind. She suddenly remembered Han Fang's apartment. Believing that this information could change Mr. Zhang's mind, she quickly decided on her next words, ready to use this new leverage to sway him. Hyona's words made Mr. Zhang stop in his tracks a few steps ahead. He turned his head slightly and looked at her from the corner of his eye as she mentioned that she knew where they could find supplies, lots of it, all in one place. "So, how about it, Mr. Zhang?" she proposed, trying to pique his interest. Meanwhile, the scene shifts to Han Fang's apartment, where the surprise that awaited him earlier is finally revealed. As it turns out, the girl he encountered when he opened the door was none other than the person responsible for emptying the supermarket in the East District. Whether it was fate or mere coincidence, this unexpected encounter left Han Fang shocked and intrigued. The girl Han Fang encountered, who had been responsible for emptying the supermarket earlier during the end of the world, possessed a space-type ability. At that moment, she was trying to retrieve something Han Fang had requested from her alternate space. Around them lay many failed attempts, adding to Han Fang's growing impatience. Suddenly, the girl pulled out a giant doll. Annoyed, Han Fang shouted, "Isn't this a model from a clothing counter? How does this have anything to do with what I just described?" To put it simply, the girl had the ability to store objects in a personal space by opening a black hole in her chest. However, retrieving specific items from this space proved to be a challenge, as she often brought out unrelated objects instead of what was requested. The girl had the ability to suck in everything she saw into her black hole, but while it's easy for her to put things in, retrieving them is much more difficult. Her accuracy in finding specific items is very low, indicating that she hasn't fully mastered her power yet. Han Fang, taking a good look around at the growing pile of random objects in his home, commented that his house would be completely filled before they found what they were actually looking for. As he continued to watch her pull out one item after another, countless questions started swirling in his mind. What is the inside of your black hole like? Why is it so hard to find things? Is it a virtual space, or has it been altered in some way? He wondered, curious and intrigued by the mysterious nature of her ability. Hearing all of Han Fang's questions, the girl simply replied that she hadn't fully explored her power yet, but one thing she was sure of was that the space inside her black hole was vast. This only fueled Han Fang's curiosity further, so he asked if he could stick his head into the space to take a look himself. With this approach, I can even help you find what we're looking for, he suggested. The girl had no objections, so as Han Fang brought his head closer to the black hole, he observed how naturally the girl's hands moved within the space. He thought to himself that it shouldn't be a big problem to take a peek. However, just seconds after he closed his eyes and prepared to enter, the unexpected happened. Han Fang closed his eyes and plunged his head into the other dimensional space. As he slowly opened his eyes inside, the scene before him left him utterly shocked. The dimensional space was indeed as vast as an ocean, with countless items floating around aimlessly. Han Fang couldn't help but laugh nervously as he took it all in. You really are the supernatural being who emptied out all the supermarkets in the East District overnight, he thought to himself. But then, another thought struck him, isn't this like looking for a needle in a haystack? Just as he was processing the overwhelming scale of the space and the task ahead, something unexpected caught his attention. Han Fang's eyes suddenly bulged out, and moments later, they started watering as he realized there was no air inside the dimensional space. He began to struggle desperately, panicking as he thought he was going to die. Fortunately, he managed to pull himself out just in time, gasping for air as he collapsed to the ground. Tears streamed from his eyes, nose, and mouth as he crouched down, trying to recover. Why didn't you tell me in advance that there was no oxygen in there? He exclaimed, still shaken. My skin feels like it's going to swell and burst, and I feel like all the water in my body is being drained. The girl, with an almost nonchalant expression, replied that she didn't know, and it was obvious since she could not enter. All she knows is that her hands had not been injured. The girl still continued to pull stuff out until she finally got what she was looking for. It was a black box, Han Fang exclaimed in excitement when he saw it. That's it, it actually exists. Unexpectedly, Han Fang heard the girl said she had found the others, then several boxes fell in front of him, shocking him greatly.